Have you ever thought about how much of ourselves we entrust to our spouses? Love, for so many, means sharing everything. Our childhood traumas, our dreams, our hearts, and even our finances. But what happens when that trust is exploited for personal gain? What if the person meant to uplift you the most uses that vulnerability against you? A lot of people have dealt with this throughout time, but today I want to look at a select few that have experienced this. And soon, as you know, I'll tell you all about it. Welcome to another episode of I'll Tell You What, a podcast where I share the weddings, marriages, and romances of Black figures throughout time. We bask on these relationships not to be messy, but to remind you of the passion in our past and to humanize the people we place on pedestals. Basically, it's all love. Black history. And I'm Ashley, your favorite raconteuse that tells you these stories every Monday and Thursday. So if you haven't already, subscribe and follow everywhere you can, especially on the tip of you. And if you love and love Black history and want it almost every single day, join us on Patreon. You get more facts and more stories while also supporting your favorite podcast. Now, if you didn't know, October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Domestic violence shows up in several ways, and a lot of the toll it takes is emotional. The women in the marriages we are reflecting on today experience that in some form. Allegedly. These women, Melanie Brown, Madam C.J. Walker, Mary J Blige, and Dorothy Dandridge, are all known for their accomplishments in entertainment and entrepreneurial spaces. Meanwhile, their husbands attempted to take advantage of their fame, wealth, and success. Now, this might be an emotional and triggering episode to some, so I understand if you can't continue to watch or listen. But with that being said, let's begin with the story of Melanie Brown and her ex-husband. Melanie Brown, known as Mel B or Scary Spice from the Spice Girls, was a part of one of the biggest girl groups of all time and was clearly that girl in the late 90s and early 2000s. As the lone Black girl of the group, I, like so many others, saw myself in her. From the moment I learned that we shared the same birthday, she became someone I rooted for as a preteen and even as I matured into adulthood. But behind her confident and bold persona, her marriage to Stephen Belafonte told a darker story of manipulation and abuse. So I've been reading her memoir, Brutally Honest, and in it, Mel B opens up about the emotional and financial abuse she endured throughout her decade-long marriage to Stephen. He allegedly isolated her from her family and friends, controlled her earnings, and squandered her money on lavish, unauthorized purchases, meaning without any permission. As Mel B described it, quote, "I remained trapped behind a wall of guilt, shame, and worthlessness. I'd been hit in the past, but bruises fade. If you feel emotionally abused, you can't see any scars, but they go way deeper, right down to your very sense of self." She wrote that he went so far as to secretly record intimate moments that they shared between themselves and even with others to blackmail her into staying in their marriage. She feared what that would do to not only her, but her career, her family, including her daughters. Now, you might be wondering how Mel even fell for him in the first place. Well, Stephen came into her life in a time where her heart was severely broken. This was when her relationship to the love of her life, comedian and actor Eddie Murphy, came to an end. Though she noticed red flags in her earliest interactions with Stefan, the attention he gave her overrode them. She wrote, quote, I knew I was still in love with Eddie and desperately hurt that not only had he publicly denied our child, but he had moved on so fast with another woman. Stefan was, I genuinely believed, a distraction. So in a matter of months, on June 6, 2007, Mel and Stefan got married in Vegas. So fast forward to 2017, when their marriage was ending. Mel B was nearly bankrupt, which is a truly devastating outcome for somebody who had such global success. But her story didn't end there. She fought hard to regain control of her life and her finances. She wrote her memoir, quote, for other women and for her children to prove that this does not have to define them. Her journey out of that marriage shows us that no matter how successful or strong anyone seems, they can still find themselves in a very vulnerable position. But like Mel B, they too can find the strength to rise again. Now let's take a quick break before we head to the next story. So we all know of Madam C.J. Walker because her accomplishments are what we were taught in the month of February in elementary school. Sarah Breedlove, as she was born, was a pioneering entrepreneur and the first Black woman millionaire in America that revolutionized the hair care industry for Black women. But beyond her monumental success, her marriage to Charles Joseph Walker also tells a tale of tension and betrayal. So after her first husband died and she divorced her second husband, Madam C.J. Walker married Charles in 1906, thus taking on his name, thus becoming Madam C.J. Walker. Charles initially supported her as she started selling her hair care products. He even helped her with advertising. However, eventually their relationship soured as her business grew into a national empire. Like many men, as her business became more and more successful, Charles became more and more resentful. He tried to exert control over her business and even attempted to take credit for her accomplishments. Now, Madam C.J. Walker's great-great-granddaughter wrote in her biography about her that Charles also cheated on her with one of her employees. By 1912, Madam C.J. Walker had had enough. She was done. She divorced Charles and continued to build her empire on her own terms. Charles married the mistress and they tried starting their own hair care company, but it failed because what God has for you is for you. But regardless, the marriage also failed as he realized that his new wife, quote, did not love me, but really just wanted the status associated with his name, which was due to his ex-wife, obviously. Anyway, later, Charles would write a public apology to Madam C.J. Walker saying how much he loved her and all that. I guess he felt like the apology needed to be as loud as the disrespect, but also don't be putting her business out there like that. Like, please. So, Madam C.J. Walker recognized the growing toxicity in her marriage early on and chose to protect her legacy before it was too late. Her story reminds us of the importance of standing on business to maintain your success, even from those who helped you in the beginning, because truthfully, sometimes those that are the closest to you are the ones that are the most jealous of you. But speaking of which, let's fast forward to the next story, which is of Mary J. Blige and Kendu Isaacs. So Mary J. Blige, the queen of hip hop soul, has always used her music as a vessel to share her pain and her healing. She's always used it as a very authentic space because truthfully, love isn't always roses and daisies for everybody. But back then, few folks actually knew that her marriage to Kendu Isaacs, whom she married in 2003, would actually become one of her deepest wounds. So for years, Kendu acted as her manager, controlling her career and her money. But behind the scenes, he was betraying her, allegedly, both emotionally and financially. In 2016, Mary filed for divorce, accusing Kendu of infidelity and financial exploitation. In one interview, Mary recalled, quote, "You start to realize that this man doesn't want you and he's just gone all the time and you're by yourself in the relationship. When you realize you're by yourself and you're just suffering through it, now it's time to do some investigating." Allegedly, Kendu had been living off her earnings, using her money not only to fund his lifestyle, but also to support his mistress, who just happened to be Mary's protege. But Kendu's audacity did not stop there. During the divorce proceedings, he demanded nearly $130,000 a month in spousal support, claiming he needed to maintain this lifestyle that he enjoyed while being married to her. They ended up settling for an undisclosed amount, but at one point throughout the divorce proceedings, Mary did have to pay him $30,000 a month in temporary spousal support. Now, despite that emotional and financial toll, Mary fought back. She said earlier this year that her experience going through the divorce is why she named her 2017 album Strength of a Woman. Still, Mary continued to thrive, using her music and her platform to rebuild herself and inspire others, just like she had done all the years before. Now, there's one more story I'll tell you about, but after this quick break. Finally, we have the story of Dorothy Dandridge, the Hollywood icon who became the first Black woman to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. Now, despite her groundbreaking career, Dorothy faced personal and financial ruin at the hands of her second husband, Jack Dennison. Dorothy married Jack, a Greek Canadian, on June 23, 1959, after being, quote, tired of being alone. Instead, she found herself in a very destructive marriage. Jack mishandled her money. He sunk it into his failed businesses, like this restaurant he had, and other personal indulgences. And in just a few years, Dorothy's once thriving finances just completely crumbled under his mismanagement. And truthfully, her career to an extent. Jack persuaded Dorothy to perform at his restaurant, which was like a huge step back and a very weird career move for someone who was a successful actress like herself. In Dorothy Dandridge, a biography written by Donald Bogle, he wrote, quote, "Ultimately, Dorothy failed to draw in the big crowds Dennison had predicted. He had effectively led the way to the career demise of the goose he figured would lay the golden egg." Like Stephen to Mel B, Jack tried isolating Dorothy from her loved ones. He would also physically abuse her as well. Those stories would fuel the rumor mill in Hollywood at that time. By 1962, Dorothy realized this marriage was to her detriment. Around that time, her house went into foreclosure and she was basically broke. She was struggling to find other acting roles, and it was just not a good time overall. Her mental health was so impacted in those last years of her life. So sadly, as her life came to a premature end in 1965, her legacy as a trailblazing actress, but also a cautionary tale of financial vulnerability, remains. The stories of Melanie Brown, Madam C.J. Walker, Mary J. Blige, and Dorothy Dandridge reveal a painful but very important truth that even the most powerful and successful women can find themselves taken advantage of by those closest to them. Now, whether it's through emotional manipulation, financial control, or betrayal, these women faced incredible challenges throughout their personal lives that tried to stain their legacies. But remember, their stories don't end with victimhood. No, ma'am. Not Black women. Not us. Each of these women fought back in her own way and reclaimed her power and her life. Their resilience should remind us all that no matter how deep the betrayal, there is always a way to rise up again. Now, thank you for joining me on this episode of I'll Tell You What. If this episode resonated with you in any form or fashion, please subscribe on the Tube of You and wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave a review because it helps other aisle runners and folks like yourself discover this podcast, and definitely share it with someone who you think might need to hear or watch it. Also, if you want to support the podcast, join us on Patreon, or you can buy merch from the I'll Tell You What shop at I'llTell.com. See you in the pews.